All right, today I want to start off by talking a little bit about the newsletter. You should have got a copy this morning. Last week in fourth grade, we talked about shape and design and architecture, and we're going to talk today and this week about our DBA that we've got coming up next week, the following week. And so we're going to review a little today on our make day. We're going to actually make a review sheet, so you'll have that to be able to use on your DBA day. There was something else I wanted to say about that. Let's see. DBAs are meetings that you must come and talk to me. We're going to have a live conversation and try to figure out if you have learned everything that you're expected to learn in the past couple modules. My DBAs work a little differently. So I know some of you might do Flipgrid and that kind of thing. Mine's an actual live conversation in person, me and you. You can come anytime between 9 a.m. and 11, Monday through Friday next week. Not this week, but next week. And we'll talk more about it. And I'll send out more emails and messages. But I just want to let you know it's coming up. You're just going to come into the meeting during those hours, between 9 and 11, whenever you're ready to come. You don't have to schedule an appointment. Just between the hours of 9 and 11. When you're ready, you come right in. I'm here waiting. I'll have my DBA set up. We'll have a conversation. We'll probably look at some images and you can talk about what you see. And then if something happens and you absolutely cannot attend the DBA in person, there will be an alternative makeup that is much more difficult, a little longer, because it's just not as easy to make sure you know everything in a standard test as it is in the DBA. That in a discussion, I can learn all kinds of things really quickly and really fast, and it's really easy for you. Grades have come out this week, so don't forget that there are no penalties for late assignments. If you've got something that hasn't been turned in, just get it turned in. If you got a bad grade on something, you thought you should have done better, resubmit it. You can resubmit as many times as you like. So if you aren't happy with the grade you've got, don't panic. Really quickly and easily, we can work through it, figure out maybe what you're missing and how to get it turned in. If you need help, please email me. We'll set up a Zoom and you and I can go one-on-one and take a look at which items you're missing and how we can get them turned in quickly. So let's talk a little bit about the review and what we're going to be talking about in our DBA. Now, like I said, later this week during our make day, we're going to make a review sheet, but let's talk about what's going to be on that review sheet. So the things we've talked about so far are line and shape, and how artists use those elements of line and shape to make objective and non-objective and abstract works of art, realistic works of art. We've talked about all kinds of different types of art, and we're going to focus on a couple specific ones when we do our DBA. So the first thing we want to remember is that lines can be straight, wavy, vertical, they can be horizontal, they can be diagonal, they can be curly, curved, spiraling, crisscross. Remember we talked about hatch marks and then cross hatch marks. Marks that go in one direction are hatch marks when they cross back over, like we see at the bottom, those crisscross marks. Those are called cross hatch marks. And so think about how artists can use those different lines and maybe how different types of lines might have different types of energy or emotions that come with them. A zigzagging, spirally line might be really exciting, or a flat line might be kind of boring. Think about the thickness or thinness of the line. Think about that thing called implied line. If we have two shapes maybe next to each other and they've got a thin line that runs through them, hey, that's an implied line. It's like a line that happens that they didn't really intend to have happen. When we look at how artists use lines to create different things, we looked at landscapes and people. We specifically looked at that contour line, like the line that goes around the outside of an object. We've talked a little bit about gesture drawings, little quick drawings. But we've thought about how you can make zigzag lines and wavy lines, and how lines can show motion or emotion, and might show mood in a work of art. We also talked about how you can use a line to create things like value and that sort of thing. We've talked a little bit about how you can use those lines to create the shadows and impressions of value. Shape. We talked a lot about shape in the past couple of weeks. We've looked at geometric shape, organic shapes, those shapes that look like they belong in nature are organic shapes, but those circles, triangles, rectangles, squares, those shapes you might find in geometry class, that math class where we learn about all the area and the volume of those shapes and forms. Those organic shapes like the foot, the bird, the tree, things we're definitely going to find in nature. So don't forget what an organic shape is. Don't forget what a geometric shape is. What's the difference between them? When we look at how artists use shapes in all kinds of different ways. We look over here on the left, we've got lots of these cool geometric shapes. And again, when we think about how line can create mood, sometimes geometric shapes look like they come with a lot of organization. If we look at this piece in the middle, it looks very organized. Everything is perfectly done at correct angles and so forth. But just as crazy, look at these in the opposite direction. These are unorganized and really crazy, but they still make use of those geometric shapes. Look at the organic shapes and how they can create all kinds of neat, interesting movement with our eye. Look at how they can kind of pull our eye in different directions. How they can represent cool and interesting things in nature, like that swan or the leaves and feathers, or even just that weird, I think that's a lava lamp down there on the right, all the weird wax melting and floating around and all that cool stuff. Then those are organic shapes like things we'll find in nature, fish, the leaves, the frog, the people. When we are considering shape, remember that when we talk about shape, we generally think of shape as being a flat, two-dimensional thing. If it's a three-dimensional shape, that becomes what we call a form. A form has three dimensions. It means, remember those shapes had height and width, but no depth. The form has height and width and also depth. It goes back into space. And so if we think of a circle as a shape, a sphere would be the form. If we think of a square as a shape, well, the cube becomes its form. In addition to talking about those things, we looked at how artists use those shapes in line to create art. Specifically, we looked at non-objective and abstract types of art. And if you remember, non-objective art means it doesn't try to represent anything. When we look at it, the artist doesn't intend for us to see any specific identifiable object. It's just going to be about those lines and shapes, about the composition of the work of art, about the movement of the eye, but we're not going to identify something familiar that we're used to seeing, like an object that we'll recognize. So look how the artist here uses all these cool shapes. These are sort of mixtures of those geometric and organic shapes. We see circles here, but these cool, odd, sort of twisted triangles become these sort of neat geometric shapes. Look at this kind of cool looking geometric shape here. This guy looks like a tadpole, like he's going to turn into a frog. When we look at how the artists use line in this one, think about how artists are using line and shape to create these neat, interesting movements with the eye. We talked earlier about how the line can create movement. Look at the zigzagging back up, and all of a sudden an arrow that shoots our eyes up, all created by line. Think about the shapes the artist uses here, those sort of implied shapes, and just like the implied lines where just the different colors next to each other create new and interesting shapes. We're looking at how artists use those geometric shapes in these lots of triangles here on the left. And then on the right, we see all these cool squares and rectangles, all in this big sort of oval. And last but not least, we see these cool circles, all these geometric shapes Over here we have all these really cool geometric, but also some cool organic shapes. Look at that really weird pattern in the back there. We also talked about abstract art, and abstract is different than non-objective because abstract, we are going to find an object or something that we can identify that will go, hey, that's a farm. There are sheep. Those are things we recognize. There's trees. I recognize trees. That's a mountain. Hey, those are mountains. They may not be clearly identifiable, but I can tell the artist was going for a sky and some mountains and some things up close, but it's different than normal. And it's different because it's abstracted. It's been changed. And if you'll remember, we talked about different ways that an artist can abstract works of art. They might simplify when we talk about those simplifications, simplify the shapes, simplify the colors. Go with those basic colors, primary colors, secondary colors very often. But very simple shapes. Break those shapes down into the very most basic shapes they've got. That's a great way to abstract. Create something that doesn't necessarily look like it belongs there, or something that's very strange that we see and that's undiscovered, maybe like this face. If you'll notice, this is just a barn back here and a little barn back here, and they've got their laundry hanging out and drying, and this is just a log and the tree here, and this is laundry in a basket with these sheep here. But if we look at it just right, this becomes a mustache of a man and his lips. This becomes his nose, and the little huts become his eyes. And so that in itself is an abstraction. There's something different there. We call that displacement. Here, the artist is abstracting a little bit because they've simplified the colors just a little bit. Probably not as much as here, obviously, or here, or even, wow, look how simplified and those shapes and colors are to create this abstract work of art. And we can tell it's a sunset. These are landscapes. We can identify what they are. Maybe, if you did abstracts of objects like shoes or basketballs, you might think about how you can distort and change those, but still be able to recognize what it is you drew to begin with. So those are the differences between non-objective, means it has no object that we can identify, and abstract, which means we can identify an object, but it's going to be different. Or we can identify the subject matter, but it's going to be different than realistic. It's going to be changed in some way. All right, guys. We'll talk more about your DBA on our Mate Day.